An ideal family on the outside, 9 years of happiness. But what hides behind the facade? A chance encounter revealed the truth: betrayal by her husband and her best friend. Instead of tears, a plan for revenge. Two women joined forces to destroy everything he held dear: career, money, reputation. But how will this story end? Who will emerge victorious and who will become the victim? Discover just how far this game of revenge will go. Time is a curious sculptor. In 9 years of marriage, it seemed to have carefully carved each detail in Katie and Michael's lives, turning their union into a picture worthy of old portraits. Everything in their home breathed peace and warmth. The soft light pouring from the windows, endless kitchen conversations over tea, and Michael's gentle voice that seemed to warm even the coldest of winters. For Katie, their life was something so natural, so harmonious, that imagining it any other way was impossible. Michael's love wasn't just a word or a promise, it hovered in the air, present in his every look and slightest gesture. Each time he stayed late at the office, yet still called her before bed. His voice was a lullaby, promising her safety and calm. Katie lived in a world built on a steadfast foundation. Their 9 years together had been cloudless, not because there hadn't been small arguments or disagreements, but because Michael always healed the wounds before they could ache. He was her rock and her shoulder, the mountain that stood unshaken to shield her from any storm. To passers-by, they looked like something from an old romance. Two people who loved and understood each other as no one else could. In a world full of uncertainties and doubts, Katie believed she had been given a rare gift and cherished every moment she spent with him. And how could she not love him? Michael was tender and reserved, strong and reliable. Looking at him, Katie felt a peacefulness spreading within her, like a river across spring meadows. But behind this deceptive idyll, behind the veil of their perfect love, a shadow lay in wait, of which Katie had no inkling. And while the world seemed to her as unbreakable as the rock from which it was carved, one day she would discover that even the firmest rock could crack and shatter into pieces. As it is often said, coincidences are rarely coincidental. One Saturday evening, Katie received an unexpected invitation to an old school friend's birthday party, a friend she'd long lost touch with. She hesitated, unsure whether to attend, but in the end decided that a bit of socializing couldn't hurt. And so, on a cozy restaurant balcony, as the evening began draping the city in its twilight hues, Katie met Louise, a young, beautiful woman with keen, attentive eyes and a mysterious smile that seemed to linger on the edge of her lips. Louise sat across from her, embodying a quiet confidence, and there was something about her that intrigued and captivated Katie. The two women quickly found common ground. Their conversation flowed easily, as if an unseen bond already existed between them, one they had only just begun to discover. Louise, as it turned out, worked in the sales department of a large company, and soon Katie learned it was the same company where Michael worked. It's a small world, Katie thought, smiling to herself. She tactfully kept her husband out of the conversation, feeling no need to share unnecessary details. Before long, the topic turned to personal lives, and Louise confided that she had recently met her true love. Her eyes sparkled as she described how lucky she felt to have found such a gentle, caring man. Katie couldn't help but smile, listening to these words. It was as though Louise was experiencing the same emotions she herself had felt many years ago when she first met Michael. From that evening on, the two women kept in touch, sharing more and more, building a small, private world where they could confide in each other, celebrating their joys and easing their doubts. Katie cherished this friendship, and with it, as if along with the first rays of spring sun, there was something new and tender in her life, something she saw as a gift from fate. But fate, like the world itself, often weaves its webs with invisible threads, and Katie had yet to discover the role her new friend would play in her life. Weeks passed since Katie and Louise became close friends. Katie couldn't help but rejoice in this new acquaintance, unaware that their friendship would mark the beginning of changes that would forever alter her life. One day, Michael informed her that he would be going on another business trip. This was so familiar to Katie, part of their life that she accepted as a given. But soon after his departure, she felt an unsettling sense of anxiety deep within her. Perhaps it was merely a woman's intuition whispering to her that not everything was as it seemed. In an attempt to distract herself, she decided to take a stroll through the shops and listen to the bustle of strangers' conversations to calm her thoughts. But that day, her life changed forever. In the window of one of the stores, she accidentally caught a reflection, two figures closely pressed against each other. It was her husband, and next to him stood Louise. They weren't just walking, they seemed to be one, laughing, oblivious to the world. Michael had his arm wrapped around her waist, and even in the glass reflection, Katie could see how tenderly he gazed at his companion. That look made her breath catch, as if her heart had suddenly clenched and shattered. At that moment, the world around her seemed to fade, leaving only a deafening silence and a sharp pain exploding in her chest. Katie stood frozen, unable to move, until the images in the glass finally faded away. Only then could she force herself to walk away, trying to maintain her composure so that no one would notice her turbulent emotions. She didn't remember how she made it home, how she found herself at the threshold of their cozy and now foreign family nest. It felt as if time had frozen and the shadows slowly creeping over her thoughts grew darker. For the first time in 9 years, she was engulfed by a sense of betrayal, deep as an abyss, with sharp, agonizing edges from which there was no escape. But Katie was not one to give up easily. That night, as her emotions settled, she decided she would remain silent and observe. Hasty conclusions were mistakes, and she knew that the best weapon was patience. Every morning for Katie began with the same routine. She would wake up early to prepare breakfast for Michael and get ready for work. At the school where she taught, her students awaited her, full of energy and curiosity. However, ever since she saw her husband with Louise, the familiar joys had turned into a struggle against inner anxiety. Katie tried to focus on her lessons, but deep inside she was tormented by questions. How could this happen? How could Michael betray her? Every time she heard his name, her heart tightened. She walked through the school hallways, interacting with colleagues and students, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if her once bright world was slowly descending into shadow. Day by day, coming home, Katie observed her husband. He behaved as usual, talking about work, sharing his plans, joking about trivial matters. But every laugh seemed false, every smile a mask. In those moments when he embraced her and kissed her goodbye, she felt a strange confusion. How could one love and deceive at the same time? Every gesture of his, every word, began to feel insincere. She couldn't help but wonder how Michael was able to continue his life without revealing any signs of change. It seemed as though he were a completely different person, strange and unfamiliar. Katie often lost herself in thought, replaying scenes with Louise in her mind, searching for a clue that could explain her husband's behavior. She felt like a detective on the hunt for evidence capable of shattering this beautiful yet deceptive picture of their life together. And each evening, watching him, she became increasingly convinced that she was in a state of bewilderment. Every evening, when Michael returned home, Katie struggled to mask her feelings. She prepared dinner, set the table, but deep inside, chaos reigned. At the table, they talked about their day, but her thoughts wandered far from those conversations. She listened to him, trying to gauge how he managed to hide his secrets so easily. One day, as Michael began discussing work, he mentioned Louise. Katie's heart stopped. He was oblivious to how his words could hurt her. "Louise is just a wonderful colleague," he said enthusiastically. Katie felt something tear inside her. In that moment, she wanted to scream, to ask him the question that had tormented her since she had seen them together, but she held back. She didn't want him to suspect that she knew something. Her life resembled a theater, where she played her role, striving not to reveal her true nature. She smiled when he joked, nodded when he shared his successes at work. But in her eyes, as in her soul, shadows began to settle. Katie began to feel like a spectator, watching life from the sidelines while everything around continued to move. Her students noticed that something was off, and one day a little girl asked, "Miss Katie, are you sad today?" Katie had no answer for that question. She only smiled and said she was tired. But returning home, she fell back into her world of thoughts. In the dark of night, when Michael was already asleep, Katie couldn't find rest. She lay in bed, listening to his steady breathing while tormented by conflicting feelings. Her heart raced between love and betrayal, the desire to keep her family intact, and the anger at the deceit. She realized that this state couldn't go on forever. Katie decided it was necessary to take control of the situation. Her thoughts of revenge grew clearer. Now, as she observed how Michael lived his ordinary life, she knew it was time to take action. Once her mind filled with plans, she felt a resurgence of power ready to spring into action. Katie was increasingly immersed in thoughts of her husband's betrayal, and at the same time, her friendship with Louise was strengthening. Each meeting with this charming woman reminded her of how easy it is to trust and how deceptive first impressions can be. Louise shared her dreams of a future with Michael, unaware that the man she spoke of was her best friend's husband. Every time she described her caring and loving fiancé, Katie felt a bitter feeling brewing in her soul. One day, deciding to see how Louise would react to a meeting with Michael, Katie invited her to have coffee in a cozy cafe. She intended to observe Louise's reaction when she realized that her perfect boyfriend was actually her own husband. Before the meeting, Katie decided to call Michael and let him know that her car was in the shop. She asked him to pick her up from the cafe. At the appointed hour, Katie and Louise settled at a table by the window. In the conversation, Louise, seemingly unaware of what she was doing, excitedly talked about how Michael always supports her in her endeavors and how he cares for her. Katie listened, holding back her feelings, trying not to give herself away. In that moment, she felt the urge to express everything that had been building up inside her, but she knew that now was not the time. Katie saw Michael pull up to the building in his car. Her heart raced with excitement, and she instinctively felt her breath catch. She stood up and pressed her hands against the glass, waving at him. Michael, noticing her, smiled and waved back, unaware that his wife was sitting at a table with none other than Louise. However, Louise, sitting with her back to the window, turned around just then and saw him. In her eyes, there was a moment of realization, and her face paled as if something inside her had broken. She froze, unable to betray her emotions, even as a storm raged within her. Katie watched closely as Louise tried to maintain her composure, as if nothing had happened. Louise's confidence suddenly cracked, and Katie felt a growing satisfaction at the realization that Louise now had no choice but to face the truth. Katie and Louise returned to their conversation, but tension hung in the air. The friends quickly said their goodbyes, and as they stepped outside, each of them understood that their lives would never be the same. Louise, struggling to contain her confusion, said, "See you later, Katie." Katie nodded, hiding her joy and excitement. She knew that this moment had become a turning point, and they both found themselves caught in a trap they had not willingly entered, but which they were now ready to use to their advantage. Each of them walked home with the thought that their relationships would never be the same again. That evening, as the moon reflected in the calm waters of the park and the evening breeze whispered secrets, Louise called Katie, her voice sounding anxious and slightly trembling. They agreed to meet on a bench in the park, under the shadow of sprawling trees, as if the trees themselves could hide their secrets. When Katie arrived, Louise was already sitting, rubbing her hands together nervously. Her face was a canvas of apprehension, and it seemed each breath she took required immense effort. Katie sat beside her, and in their silence hung a tension that was almost palpable. "Katie, I have something to tell you," Louise said, her voice quivering, as if she teetered between fear and resolve. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been with Michael for almost a year." Louise's words hung in the air, and Katie froze. It was like thunder on a clear day. Every piece of her inner world that had seemed whole just moments before now shattered with a loud crack. Louise continued, unaware of Katie's clenched fists. "He's already met my parents. We even talked about marriage, but he always finds excuses," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "I thought he really loved me." Katie felt a surge of anger and betrayal crash into her heart, but at the same time a spark of understanding ignited within her. She stood on the precipice. A decision had to be made, and it had to be ruthless. "We can make him pay," Katie said, her words cutting through the air like sharp blades. "He thinks everything can continue as before, but together we will make him answer for his actions." In Louise's eyes, fear and surprise flickered. She hadn't expected such a turn, but dark desires for revenge were awakening within her too. Their conversation continued as the shadows of the trees surrounded them, consuming everything that was in plain sight. Together they became allies in this game where the stakes were high and the consequences unpredictable. Katie knew that every word from Louise was bringing her closer to a decision she had made. And at that moment, as they resolved to seek revenge, she felt the power returning to her hands. Vengeance, like a bright star on the horizon, beckoned her forward, and she was ready to go to the end, leaving no chance for the one who had betrayed her trust. Michael was a man whose social prowess dazzled those around him. His charm could light up a room, and his laughter was infectious, echoing through gatherings of friends and colleagues alike. With an extensive network of acquaintances, he was not merely a participant in his social circles, he thrived in them. His career, too, was of paramount importance, intricately woven into the very fabric of his identity. He reveled in his professional success, aspiring for more each day as ambition pulsed through his veins like lifeblood. Money was not just a means to an end for Michael. It was a symbol of his accomplishments, the tangible proof of his hard work and strategic maneuvering. However, in the shadows of his pursuits lay an insatiable greed. As he climbed the corporate ladder, he often rushed to secure deals without scrutinizing the motives of those with whom he partnered. This reckless ambition would become the fulcrum of Katie and Louise's revenge. The two women, united by their shared betrayal, set their plans into motion. Louise, who worked alongside Michael, was adept at navigating the intricate web of office relationships. With keen intuition, she began to glean insights about his ambitions from colleagues. They spoke of Michael's relentless pursuit of a promotion, a coveted position that would elevate him further in the corporate hierarchy. The more he sought to impress, the more careless he became in his dealings, often ignoring the red flags that might have sent a more cautious individual running for cover. In her heart, Louise recognized an opportunity. She recalled a wealthy client from her past, a figure wrapped in a shroud of rumors and speculation, known for both his extravagant wealth and dubious business practices. Her previous employer had conducted due diligence, discovering the man's questionable reputation, and had ultimately decided against engaging in any partnership. Now, however, the thought of this client sparked a dangerous idea in Louise's mind. She approached Michael one afternoon, her voice casual yet laced with intention. "You know, I heard about this incredible client," she began, her eyes glinting with mischief. "He's looking for partners, and I think he could bring a significant influx of revenue to your department. My old firm turned him down, but maybe that's an opportunity for you." Michael's eyes lit up, and his interest piqued at the mention of untapped potential. He leaned closer, eager to hear more. The prospect of securing a lucrative deal danced before him, a tantalizing lure that clouded his judgment. "You really think he's worth looking into?" he asked, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. Louise feigned innocence, masking her true intentions beneath a veneer of friendship. "Absolutely. I think he could be a game-changer for you, especially if you want to impress the higher-ups." As they discussed the client further, the pieces of their plan fell into place. Louise would guide Michael into a partnership that was built on shaky ground, leveraging his greed and ambition to ensnare him in a web of his own making. She would lead him toward the precipice of ruin, all while ensuring he remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. Together, Katie and Louise stepped deeper into their scheming, each meeting charged with a mix of anticipation and dread. The stakes had never been higher, and as they plotted Michael's downfall, the thrill of revenge wrapped around them like a cloak, shielding them from the fear of what was to come. Katie, unable to come to terms with Michael's betrayal, decided to take a different approach. She knew that mere observation wasn't enough. She needed proof to transform her suspicions into undeniable reality. At that moment, she reached out to a private detective who could uncover all of her husband's cards. After several days of waiting and investigation, the detective provided Katie with shocking information. At first, she could hardly believe what she had learned. Michael not only had other affairs on the side, but he was also playing dangerous games in the business world, secretly selling his clients' data to competitors. Every contract, every agreement he signed became part of his personal business, unsafe but highly profitable. Katie sat on the edge of her sofa, scanning the document provided by the detective. Her heart raced with shock and anger as she realized that her trust in her husband had been built on lies. But that wasn't the only revelation that shook her to her core. Michael also had a secret bank account, the existence of which Katie had never suspected. These funds, as the detective discovered, had been amassed from various deals, and their total was growing month by month. Feeling the darkness hidden behind the shiny mask of their shared life beginning to unravel, Katie understood that she had to use this information wisely. This was not just a matter of revenge, it was a matter of justice. She needed to reclaim her dignity and show Michael that his betrayal would not go unpunished. With this thought, Katie began to devise a plan, one that would allow her to exact revenge on her husband while shielding herself from his deceit. She now knew she had all the tools necessary to play this dangerous game and take back control of her life. Her inner voice urged her to be cautious. Every step she took had to be deliberate to avoid missing her chance. With each passing day approaching the climax, Katie felt her resolve strengthening. The time had come, and she was ready for action. That day in the office was filled with an unusual atmosphere. As soon as Louise walked into the building, she was met by a flurry of excited voices and tense faces from her colleagues. Something was wrong. Barely having reached her desk, they gathered in the conference room where their boss was preparing to announce news that could change the company's fate. "Today I must share some unpleasant news with you," he began, his voice trembling with tension. Louise felt her heart start racing. She couldn't believe this was happening, and somehow she felt uneasy. The boss announced that their company was in a very precarious financial position, and the blame fell squarely on Michael. There was no doubt in his words. He revealed the details of the case, pointing to one of the key clients Michael had worked with. This client turned out to be extremely unreliable, evading obligations and, as a result, putting their company on the brink of bankruptcy. "We are forced to inject additional funds to stay afloat and maintain our reputation," he continued, raising his brows under the stress. When the boss finished, silence reigned in the room. Louise, feeling a surge of anxiety, could only look at her boyfriend, who now had to face the consequences of his actions. Michael was demoted. What had once been his pride was now a source of humiliation. He was no longer a leader, but was subordinate to those he had once commanded. He had every reason to feel dejected. His face had drained of color, and the confidence with which he had always approached his work had vanished. Louise, watching this scene unfold, felt a mix of emotions. She understood that her relationship with Michael had become not only a source of joy, but also of anguish. Now she was the only one who could support him in this difficult trial. However, deep down, she knew this situation was just the beginning of his downfall, and she and Katie had already set their revenge plan in motion. Later that evening, after work, Michael came to see Louise, utterly distraught. He was defeated, his spirit crushed. Louise greeted him with sympathy, trying to support him, but every word she spoke tore at her soul, for she knew she was part of this devastating fall. Louise sighed, realizing that their game was only just beginning. No matter how difficult it was for her, she knew this step was necessary to complete their shared plan. A month passed, and Katie eagerly awaited the consequences of her actions. In her heart burned the anticipation of revenge as she finally sent all the information gathered by the detective about Michael's secret dealings to his boss. These documents clearly outlined how her husband had sold client data to competitors, betraying his company. Soon after, the news came that Michael had been fired. The boss, having received all the evidence, was furious. He promised not only to sever business ties with him, but also to take legal action. This news spread through the office, and all those who had once looked at Michael with admiration could no longer hide their disdain. On the day Michael left the office for the last time, he was not just depressed. Everything he had strived for, his entire life, was destroyed. As he stepped out the doors, he met the gaze of two women standing in the parking lot, smiling at him. In that moment, he realized that those smiles promised him nothing good. It was not just a coincidence, it was revenge. Katie and Louise stood together, relishing the moment of triumph as their ex returned to his car. Each step Michael took felt unbearably heavy. He couldn't believe that reaching rock bottom was caused by his own actions. This was the end of the life he had known and the beginning of something new and frightening.